everybody doing? And let's get right into it. The name of our session is What Silicon Valley Doesn't Want You to Know. So we will do our best to share insights that you don't already know about Silicon Valley. If we don't, then it's all their fault. But they're both really brilliant men doing incredible things, so I don't think there'll be a problem. But now, Niko and Phil, both of you coming from different countries, Russia and Greece, what have you found personally to be the advantages and the challenges of being an international entrepreneur?
Well, you're the founder, so you should get started, with this one.
Well, I was born in Russia, but that was a long time ago. I came over to the U.S. with my family when I was 8 years old, although mostly on the East Coast. I was started my first few companies in Boston, and then really wanted to come to Silicon Valley because I wanted to build a consumer company here. So when we started Evernote, I moved my team out here, and we did it in Silicon Valley because I really believed in the Silicon Valley, the magic. Everyone was saying this was the place to do it, and many parts about that were right. I found this place to be really, really welcoming. Really open-minded about most things. I spent probably 19 years in Boston, starting my first two companies, and I never felt that I was from Boston because I didn't grow up there. And within 6 months of being here, I felt like I was from here. So even though I've only lived in this area for about 11 years, which is less time than I've lived in most places, I actually feel like I'm from here. And I think that's more to do with the place and the culture and the openness and the ability to embrace anyone with kind of a crazy idea.
Yeah. And for people who don't know, can you share what All Turtles does? You have a really interesting startup studio that you've created.
So this is my fourth startup. I was fortunate enough to start and sell two tech startups in Boston, and then was the co-founder and CEO of Evernote, and then became a VC for a couple of years, and thought there's a really big inefficiency with this model, with the Silicon Valley model of venture and small startups. This idea of having to start a company before you can really prove your ideas just seemed kind of inefficient. Inefficient here, inefficient in Silicon Valley, but crippling everywhere else in the world. Like, it's hard enough to make a company here, but we're actually really good at making companies here. In most other places in the world, there's great creativity, there's great entrepreneurism, but it's not a very, very good ecosystem usually for making small companies. So All Turtles is a way to make hopefully important technology products without forcing people to make companies. It's kind of a product-first company. And we really are thinking of ourselves like Netflix, the same way that Netflix operates all over the world in like 20 different countries and makes and distributes really innovative, original programs. We want to do the same thing, except we're not going to make TV shows, we're going to make tech products. But it's only been about a year and a half, so it's a little bit too early to say how it's going, but feels like we're off to a good start.
So Niko, thank you for that. So Niko, when we spoke on the phone a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that stood out to me about what your whole kind of belief system around Silicon Valley is that it's a mindset. It's not just a place, it's a mindset. So for the entrepreneurs that came out here to get access to the ecosystem, and for the audience, do you need to be in Silicon Valley, though, to be as successful as some of the unicorns out there?
Yeah, sure. I wouldn't say that you absolutely need to be here, but you definitely need to understand how this place works, because indeed it's a great mindset. It's a place where if you are perceived as the crazy one, where you grow up or where you start running your first business or working for, there are many crazy ones over here, so you could find a lot of other people who can understand you. The level of ambition over here is phenomenal, and it's really hard to find this in other places. And often, you may have a company that is right idea at the right time, but because you're in a very small ecosystem, you may be getting complacent. Whereas you come here, and everybody's so eager to conquer the earth and get to the moon. So understanding that mindset is very, very cool. If you have momentum, You definitely need to pay a visit here to find more customers, recruit executives, raise a lot of money from good, bad, dumb VCs, because this is going to give you a lot of social proof. Like more than anything, like Silicon Valley is a unique place that can help you with all sorts of marketing, like give you social proof and gets you accelerated. Do you need to be based out of here to do that stuff? No. If you can have a distributed team nowadays, I would say it's like a competitive advantage because everything here is so expensive. Like we're very thankful that a lot of people still go and rent 2-bedroom, 2 bathrooms, and they have like 4 or 5 people living over there. So we're very thankful that these people decide to do that and start companies. But not everybody, obviously needs to do that, especially for a long period of time. Yeah.
So Phil, what's your take on this? You're a bit more global with things, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Niko on this. I think there is a mindset that's not unique to here, but it's prevalent here, and it's a very useful mindset to have. And maybe I definitely recommend anyone who can spend a little bit of time in Silicon Valley who's interested in being an entrepreneur to do it. Maybe it's only a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but the main mindset, which I think is really rare everywhere in the world, no, not that common here, but at least you find it here pretty often, is a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs have this idea where, well, they kind of have this dream about what they want to do, but they don't think it's realistic. So they're going to do something first. They're going to do what they can do first so that they can do what they want to do later. Like you're going to do step 1 right now. You're not really that excited about step 1, but we're going to do step 1 so that later we can do step 2. And that as a formula almost never works. It almost never works for investors. Like as an investor, when I hear someone pitching me something, and if they're not excited about the thing they're doing, there's zero chance that I'm going to invest. But in many places in the world, this is a very common sense pattern. It's like first do the thing that you can, and then build on top of that to do what you really want. And here, it's very much accepted to just do what you really want to right away as step 1. Just figure out how to do it. And if that means raising a lot more money, fine. It's just as easy to raise a lot of money as a little bit of money. You just need the right kind of idea and the right kind of pitch. So I think there's people that are much more willing here to really do the ambitious thing right away instead of doing the conservative thing first. And I think that's a very helpful mindset. Having said that, once you've kind of understood that, I think you can do it almost anywhere in the world. So there's nothing really magical here. And yeah, as Niko says, it's super expensive and hard to recruit people. So if you can get that mindset anywhere else in the world, it's probably actually an advantage over trying to build it here exclusively.
Yeah, actually, Phil, what Phil just talked about, like the mindset of like going for it, is the advice that Warren Buffett gave to an MBA student at Harvard Business School, like about a decade ago. And I read this, a few weeks ago, where that student was coming from somewhere else, and he said, "I'm doing my MBA in order to get into a good consulting firm, meet CEOs, and then I'll go and get operating experience in order to start my company." And Warren Buffett was like, "Dude, if you know that you want to start a company, why don't you do it right now? You don't save sex for old age because it's not going to happen."
Good tip. Very good points. I'm sure that's gonna be a key takeaway for everybody. So Niko, I'm glad you're talking about, people going for it and just going after the idea, because something else that you're known for is radical ideas, crazy ideas. If it's not really kind of out there and different and crazy, what are some ideas that you've invested in where others were kind of like, why the hell are you doing this? You're out of your mind.
Yeah, so I totally love that, because anything that's controversial in the beginning, it means that's interesting for some people, and it can totally enable very strong word of mouth momentum. And when you're getting started, especially in consumer, the hardest thing ever is distribution. It's getting people to pay attention to you. So if you're doing something controversial, it means that people are going to be talking about you. The press will be more excited to write a story about you. Of course, you cannot be controversial about the same thing forever. This is going to bite your ass. It needs to become more mainstream over time. What have we invested that was controversial in the early days? We invested in Stripe. In the beginning, Stripe was going after developers who were trying to accept credit card payments online. Everybody was telling the founders, "Oh, you should go after the really big e-commerce players and convince them to move to Stripe." This was not like a obvious idea back then. Like when they pitched us, they said, "Oh, we're going to be going after companies that have not been founded yet." So my partners had a lot of courage to back them. We invested in Snap in the beginning. If you were to tell anybody what Snap was doing. It was literally all about sexting. That's what the male mind thought, but 80% of the users were girls, and there are not that many, lesbians in the world, and they were using it like over 20 times every day. Most recently, I invested in a funeral business. That again, would sound like kind of crazy, but this is a space that hasn't had its internet moment, and now in 50% of the cases where the decision maker is the daughter or the son of the surviving grandparent, probably she or he would go and do some internet searches to figure out if the prices and the quality of the service that they're promised by the local funeral home are the right ones.
Thank you. So speaking of funerals, this might be a really bad way to set up this next question, but I want to switch gears to something that's been in the media a little bit more and something that some conferences are focusing on right now around founder well-being and mental health and just the psychology of entrepreneurs who are grinding and hustling and killing themselves every day, not really taking care of themselves. Phil, from someone with your background investing and as an entrepreneur, and then Niko being an investor, what are some things that you do when communicating with entrepreneurs and creators that you work with you want them to succeed financially, you want that return, but if they're not alive to actually carry through, then you're not going to get a return. So what do you do to combat some of that, the culture around that?
Well, I think having more stress, working harder, doesn't necessarily lead to any better outcomes. You can usually tell burnout if it's coming pretty early on. And we've really tried in all of my companies, well, maybe not like the first one, we were like all too young to understand this, but certainly by our second company, certainly by Evernote, we've tried to make a culture that very much discourages heroism. Like, we're not looking for people to do heroic deeds, to like rescue a project, to pull too many all-nighters, to come into the office if you're feeling sick or something. In fact, we've tried to have a very strong policy that says, like, if you're feeling sick, stay the fuck home. Like, don't be a hero.
Don't infect everybody else.
Yeah. And this is the way that you make any of this kind of culture stick is the same way that you do anything as a CEO, which is you just have to repeat yourself 100 times. Like the only thing a CEO really has to do is say the same thing over and over and over again, like 10,000 times, way more than you think you need to. And as an investor, it's a little bit different. It's I don't really think it's the job of the investor to set the culture in the company. You can definitely act as a mentor. You can maybe give some examples. But yeah, the problem of burnout is maybe one of the biggest problems here. We actually have a couple of projects that we're working on now specifically to address employee mental health and employee burnout issues as products, because I think this is a very quickly growing area everywhere in the world. And you just have to, 50% of it is just paying attention to it and saying you're not going to resort to heroism. You're going to try to do the right stuff. You're going to encourage people to take vacations, encourage people to slow down and to relax a little bit, and to really mean that. So we have, probably a dozen different examples of different techniques that we've used at Evernote and at All Turtles and various other companies to do that. It's definitely a big problem.
Yeah, so as a European, I do understand the importance of taking vacations, and I was made in Greece, so for me, taking time off, I understand, encourage all the people I work with to do it. Yeah, there are a lot of companies where that heroism culture is like prevalent, and you can even see it like when a founder has a baby, and or his wife, had a baby, and then they don't even take time off. Like a week later, they're back at the office. And the biggest thing, is like for a founder to learn how to have support systems, learn how to scale themselves and manage stress, because the job description constantly changes. So if you don't know how to deal with stress, it's going to wear you out in no time. So what do we do? The best thing we can do is like to introduce them to people like Phil, who have been there, have done that, know how to manage stress. And for various people, there are different things that work. So one of our founders, Justin Kahn of Atrium, he most recently published a blog post with everything that he's been doing, because now, in his own words, he's been the happiest he's ever been in his adult life. And for him, what works really well is working out, meditation, spending less time on his phone, doing email only on the computer. So there are different things for different people. So we make intros, to founders who've tried different things, especially for first-timers, because they don't know how to manage stress.
There is kind of one thing which is probably at the base of all of this, which is being a founder, starting a company is going to be the hardest thing that most people do. It is extraordinarily difficult and stressful. And so at the very least, it's only worth doing if you're building something that you deeply care about. Like every job I've ever had, I've wanted it to be my life's work. Literally every job I've ever had, I've thought, this is the thing that I can do for the rest of my life and be happy because it's important enough. And I would never want to it seems ridiculous to me to start a company around an idea that is anything but an all-consuming infatuation for me, because it is going to be that difficult. So at the very least, it may as well be something that you really feel worthwhile. Anyone who's thinking of starting an idea because they think it's an interesting market opportunity or something like that, but unless they are willing to give their lives to advance something that's in the world, it's probably already a bad start. A lot of stress is much easier to deal with if you're doing it in the service of something that you really feel deserves it.
Because you're going to be repeating yourself 2,000 times, right? So you better enjoy what you're working on. Like if you're not insanely passionate and crazy or have like a North Star, it's not going to work.
You're not going to like it more after 5 years. Like if you're not in love with it in the beginning, you're not going to fall more in love with it 5 years and 3 funding rounds later.
Yeah, because things only get more complex, worse. Like again, having a portfolio of about 10 companies, every week there's something going on. Like my co-founder said that to me, the CTO is going to quit, we're going to lose the biggest customer, we're going to get sued, there's going to be that bad press about us, the VP of engineering is sleeping with the general counsel. There's always something going on, right? So you need to learn how to manage that and be, maybe a little bit tone deaf with your own emotions at times.
Thank you. I just have one more question, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. Why invest in an international entrepreneur, besides the fact that you yourself are one? Why is it important to have a portfolio that's diverse? And I'm not just talking about the bottom line. Why is it important? And then Phil, I guess if you want to answer that from the perspective of supporting product developers and people focusing on building a service.
Yeah, so again, we want to invest in the most ridiculously ambitious founders who are out there, who are building category-defining companies, and they can go the distance as CEOs to make it happen. We don't check passports. We do believe good ideas can come from anywhere. Talent is indeed universal, and opportunity is not. I personally like a lot of first-time founders from overseas because they don't know any better. They think they're the crazy ones where they are. They want to take risks. Nobody gives them the opportunity. So they've gone the extra mile to come here or to get started to pursue their dreams. And these are people who have insane perseverance. They're grinders. They have what Phil just mentioned before, like they would go crazy, to see their dream come true. So if you have somebody like that and who doesn't have the experience, the chances of that person getting there are much, 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 much higher.
Yeah, I don't really look for immigrants or non-immigrants. I never think about it. There's like 7 billion people in the world, and I think really exceptional talent exists kind of randomly distributed among that group of people. And I've been lucky enough to have a structure where I get to see really great entrepreneurs in many countries, not wait for them to immigrate here, just see them kind of where they are. And so the vast majority of the kinds of work that I do right now winds up being with people who weren't born in the United States, but I'm not looking for that. That's just how the numbers work. That's just because most people in the world aren't here, so that's how it turns out.
Great, thank you. We're going to take about 5 minutes for questions. Any questions?
Here, why don't we have you first?
Thank you. Hi, thank you. My name is Nita Achan. So I work with Middle Eastern and North African entrepreneurs, helping them navigate entry into the U.S. market. one of the most common barriers that they face is the language barrier. So I'm curious to know your experience with, as international investors and entrepreneurs with regard to language barriers, and what advice would you give to these international startups that are pitching to investors and struggle with the language?
Yeah. So I do think that being able to speak English is an important, kind of unfair but important skill. And luckily there's many places in the world where people have access to English language education. And it is a major thing that I think people need to do. It isn't fair that that's what it is, but it certainly gives you a big advantage. I'd say that a lot of people, in my experience, their English is much better than they think it is. People lack confidence. This is especially common in Asia. I spent a lot of time in Japan and Korea and China, where a lot of people actually have pretty decent written English. Like, they can do email, they just have very little confidence in speaking. And so we've done a bunch of things to just try to improve people's confidence. We actually have a couple of products that we're working on for that. And Niko just pointed out, we had a cool program actually at Evernote. At Evernote we had 13 different countries. We had offices in 13 different countries. And everyone spoke English, more or less. And I could understand everyone. I could understand the people in our India office, and I could understand the people in our Beijing office and the people in our Zurich office. But when the people in our Paris office talked to the people in the Beijing office, they were speaking English, but they were having a hard time understanding each other. So we offered accent reduction classes to everyone. So it was voluntary, but if anyone wanted, we had this program where the company would pay to have people talk to a speech professional to try to do accent reduction. And it was the most popular benefit we offered, because I think people found it a lot of fun. People kept mistaking it for fake accent classes. People thought that we would pay to teach them how to talk like a pirate or something, and we had to keep explaining, no, it's not about faking an accent, it's about reducing an accent. But it was a big deal. So yeah, unfortunately I don't know that there's a better answer. It is important. It is a huge advantage to be able to speak English if you're trying to do anything with an international connection. And but I've had pretty good luck working with people from dozens of countries without that being a barrier.
I believe we had a gentleman right over here with a question.
Yes, thank you. So I'm coming from Italy, and I'm building up a startup together with a German person. So you bring together creativity and structure. One question that we always ask ourselves,
We're sorry for you for the structure.
Sorry?
We're sorry for the structure piece. As a Greek,
Yeah, I know. Italia, Grecia, una razza, una fassa. You know that.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So the question we're asking ourselves is that we are building up a B2C app with the ambition to reach 100 million users in 3-4 years. When we pitch this in Europe, we always get as an answer, it's too ambitious, because they are not used at having this kind of startups looking at B2C. When coming to California and to the US, do you think it's better to come with a big idea, think big, start small and scale fast? Do you think it's relevant to focus on the US market, or to come with the idea that is already global when pitching the idea?
Yeah, obviously it's your company, you know your customer and the specific use space better than me, but you need to know your audience really well whenever you're pitching. And if you come here and the idea is small, or you're just doing something for Italy, nobody would pay attention. If you want to raise from European VCs, the best thing you can do is to say, hey, I'm going to Silicon Valley, I'm raising money from there. Guess what? They're going to start moving much faster, and they're much more likely to give you a term sheet. For us here, it needs to be global. It needs to be one that could hopefully grow quickly, and the prize, if you get there, what if you're right, should be massive. Otherwise, it's not interesting. We can wait.
I think that's a really key point that Niko said. This is not globally how it is, but it's very much the case with top-tier investors like Niko in Silicon Valley. When you're pitching an investor in Silicon Valley, it doesn't, they're not interested in your plan for not failing. They're not interested in your plan B. They're not interested in how you're going to minimize the chance of failing. They expect you to fail. That is the expected condition. They think the vast majority of the time you're going to fail. What they're interested in is, well, what happens if you succeed? it has to really be worthwhile if you succeed. So this isn't, I don't necessarily agree with this as a philosophy everywhere in the world. I think there's a lot of problems in Silicon Valley that come from this philosophy. But it's important to understand that that is what's going on here. When you're pitching here, it literally, like, an investor can think, well, they're 90% likely to fail, but in that 10% of success is going to be a huge success. That's a much better deal. You're much more likely to get a term sheet than if somebody thinks, oh yeah, it's probably 85% likely that they'll succeed, but it'll be kind of medium. This is a very counterintuitive thing for most people outside of this area to really understand.
Excellent. We have another question right here.
A quick question for both of you guys. Niko, what do you believe enabled Yik Yak to be able to succeed outside of the Valley compared to other social startups?
Well, Yik Yak failed, so it doesn't matter what I believed, right?
That was after the fact, though. But that was business decisions after the fact, correct?
Yeah.
They had the initial.
So I don't know if everybody knows, but Yik Yak was an anonymous college-focused social network. What was really interesting about that company is that they were the first ones to combine or to marry location with anonymity. And this enabled them to become the most popular college newsfeed, where people were cracking college jokes, where people were talking about what was going on in their school. It worked really well in colleges, did not work well in high schools because kids there were not mature enough and they were using it for bullying. I think what was the most insightful thing about them was that, one, it democratized social media posting. Didn't matter if you were the cool kid on Instagram or you had hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter. Everybody was equal on Yik Yak, level the field. That's number one. Number two, given that you could only post in a geo that you were based out of, and they started focusing only on colleges, chances are that people were of the same mindset, they were facing the same constraints, they would be keen on laughing at the same jokes. So these two insights were the most interesting ones. Unfortunately, that's a case of a company that decided to stay in Atlanta, didn't hire people from here quickly enough who've been there, done that on community management, engineering and all these things. Like, they were so proud of their hometown and they want to put them on the map for consumer stuff. So it took them like a year to basically release the second version. In a hyper-competitive market, you cannot do that as a startup. Like, they died because they didn't innovate on the product. So it was too bad, because the initial insight and traction was amazing. Got to a couple of million MAU, like in a year's time. This is pretty cool. It doesn't happen pretty often.
That's all we have time for, folks, but Niko and Phil will be out back to share drinks with you and take some more questions. Thanks for joining us.
Everybody give it up for Melissa June Rowley, Phil Libin, and Niko Bonatsos.